So it raises the question of why read a difficult book, right? Shouldn't you be reading for pleasure? Shouldn't we be reading, for fun? All right, welcome back to Please Read Your Book. My name's Carl. I talk about books. And today I'm going to talk about this book. Just finished it a few days ago. That is Notice by Heather Lewis. Unfortunately, I had to read it on my Kindle. Kindle is not a great reading experience, but it's a book that I am not able to get here in China. So, yeah, wow, this book. This was one of the most difficult books I've ever read. A lot of people label it as disturbing. It certainly is. To me, it was more difficult than disturbing, except for kind of the final, the final event of the story, and I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to give away the plot. But yeah, this book is just absolutely terrifying and touching, and then terrifying again, and then very touching, and then it just oscillates between really touching, really terrifying, ultimately just really sad and really bleak. And it's a great book despite all of that. And I should qualify that and say, it's not terrifying in the sense that there's monsters or serial killers. It's terrifying in a very real way. It's a terrifying description of what people do to each other, and the lengths that someone will go to feel something or to be noticed, as the title gives us. Yeah, I want to preface all of this by saying it's a really difficult book. It covers a lot of very adult material. There's a lot of erotic material in it. There's a lot of sexual material in it. There's some violence in it. There's some drug use. So if you're not comfortable listening to a book discussion that touches on some of those topics, you might want to flip over to another video. Obviously, I'm not going to give anything really graphic in this video or anything like that. I'm just going to sort of discuss what the book's about, what I enjoyed about it, and all that. So enough preamble, let's kind of get into it. So the plot, just to kind of summarize the plot. I guess before I get into the plot, I want to talk about why I really liked this book, or one of the aspects of this book that I really, really liked, which was the writing. I found it to just be really compellingly written, really well written. I don't think I've read prose this good in literary fiction, for a long, long time. I mean, it is just on a sentence level, on a paragraph level, on a chapter level, and all that. It's just so well written. Heather Lewis was just an incredibly gifted writer, almost like no other that I've ever read. Obviously, I haven't read all the books in the world, and there's plenty of people that have read more than I have, but I just found it to really just be extremely powerful, extremely compelling, while also extremely difficult and disturbing. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed about it so much is that her prose is just very poignant, very straightforward, almost plain, almost like hard-boiled. And in the foreword, I think it is actually, the prose is described as hard-boiled. But it's not a crime novel, it's not a detective novel, but she seems to have taken some of that and also some of the modernist writers and used that sort of very straightforward approach. There's almost no simile, no metaphor. I think you'd struggle to even find an adverb in the book. And she uses that style of writing to write about and to discuss, like I said before, some very erotic things, some very sexual things, but also there's a lot of interior monologue with the main character, with the narrator, where she's describing how she feels in very altered states, either through sex or through drugs or through the combination. And also, at the same time, there's a lot of kind of, for lack of a better term, like soul searching. It's not navel gazing, but there's a lot of soul searching and questioning of the self and of identity, and of purpose. And she's just able to do it in a way that is just so straightforward and so plain that to me, that it's, you connect with it very immediately, and it's just really done so well. I just I couldn't get enough of it, which is very ironic because it's an extremely difficult book to read. And as compelled as I was to read it, there were not a lot, but there were two or three sections and points in the book where I had to just kind of put it down because it was just like, oh my God, it was just like so moving and so powerful, or so difficult, or so disturbing. So, okay, so to tell you about the book and the plot and the story, now that I've sort of given this, that's kind of very vague discussion of it. So this is about a young woman named Nina, although, well, she tells us her name is Nina, but she also tells us that's not her real name. So that, from the beginning, is really intriguing. Who is she really, and why does she have a fake name, and almost, is it a fake persona, and that kind of thing. But one of the reasons she has a fake name is that she's basically a freelance prostitute. She has some kind of job at the beginning, which I don't recall. I'm not sure if it's stated in the book. And because this is the internet, I'm sure I will be corrected. But it doesn't really concern that. It concerns her sort of encounters as a freelance prostitute in this parking lot of a bar that she frequents, and sometimes she buys drugs at. And very early on in the book, she has an encounter with a middle-aged man who has a very distinct taste for violent sex, for sadism, BDSM, that kind of thing. And he's got some pretty specific tastes, if you will. He takes her home and introduces Nina to his wife, Ingrid, and together they have some very bizarre kind of three-way sex encounters. And it gets pretty violent pretty quick, and we can tell very immediately there's a very thin line that's being explored between an erotic encounter and a sadistic encounter, I guess is kind of how I will describe that. And then at the same time, it gets very strange in that Nina is playing almost like a daughter role. I don't want to get into specifics, partially because of, this is YouTube and it's public. But that is an important part of the story. There is some backstory as to why she's playing that part. And I'm not going to get into all that, but it's pretty weird and it's pretty sad. And when you reach that point in the story, which is fairly early on, I mean, I'm not giving away any spoilers. If it hasn't become apparent already, it becomes apparent that this is going to be a very dark book, and that Nina is on a very dark and dangerous trajectory. And so from there, from her encounters with this married couple, she does sort of spiral. I don't want to say spiral downward. I mean, it is a downward spiral. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but like I said, I think using the term of trajectory, she follows this very evil, a very dark trajectory, and she has some increasingly dangerous relationships and encounters, both physically dangerous and emotionally dangerous. And you're kind of left wondering, like, which are actually more harmful to her. I'll kind of leave it at that. I don't want to give away like too much. A lot of the book is difficult to describe on YouTube. But one thing that's really interesting in the book is that it starts out pretty erotic and pretty juicy. And you're kind of wondering, like, oh, is this like going to be just sort of a trashy, maybe like a well-written 50 Shades of Grey kind of thing? But very quickly, you realize that the whole environment, the whole sort of canvas that you're looking at is going to shift and really take a turn towards the darkness. So, and along with that too, it's interesting to to see in the narrative how the earlier descriptions of these encounters are sensual, but as she progresses along and as the story progresses along, the physical nature of it is reduced, and it becomes more and more about kind of her interior state, and she's really on this kind of inward journey to try to find some kind of fulfillment, and also to just be noticed. And that's a word that keeps popping up in the novel, to notice. And that's really what she seems to be looking for. And unfortunately, she just has these kind of broken pathways, these broken emotional pathways inside of herself, which unfortunately are causing her to just not really find what she's looking for in the way that could lead her to find it, if that made any sense. She's basically looking at all the wrong places. But at the same time, she does seem to kind of enjoy that. And it's just really sad, and it's really weird and bleak, and yeah, I guess just sad. I mean, you just feel really sad and sorry for her as a character. You really feel like you realize that because she's wanting so badly to feel fulfilled and to be noticed, she has become manipulated by really horrible people, and she's not able to realize that. There are some points where she kind of realizes it, but she feels compelled to continue doing it. So again, it just raises a lot of questions, and it's very ambiguous. Like, it's not so much a book about a woman being manipulated and taken advantage of, because to a certain extent, she has sought it out. And she kind of seems to there are different points where she could get out of it. But because there's a lot of drug use involved with it too, she's also kind of an addict. Well, not kind of, I mean, you're either an addict or you're not. But because she has that addict kind of frame of mind, she just can't quite pull herself out of it. She never makes like a clean break from it. So enough about the book. It's a really difficult book to discuss, but it's really powerful and great. And I wanted to read some of the writing. The prose in it is, like I've said before, Heather Lewis, just an incredibly gifted writer. And I want to read a couple passages that I think will not only highlight how good her writing is, but will also help kind of illustrate the points that I'm trying to make of this strange, this dark, sort of gray and dark, ambiguous territory that's being explored here. So this first passage, I'll just read this first passage here. I was beginning to think his eyes never changed. His being this middle-aged man that she has an encounter with. I was beginning to think his eyes never changed, that they looked the same way always, guarded but not entirely cold, not quite closed off. There's so much more someone like this can accomplish if he keeps himself just that little bit open. That's the pull. And the kicker too, that it's absolutely you he's messing with, not anyone else. That's the thing you've probably always wanted, someone's undivided attention. And you've wanted it so much and for so long that the form it takes no longer matters. So I think that kind of points to what I was saying earlier, where she knows she's seeking some kind of attention. And she knows that this guy will give her that kind of attention. And she knows that this guy is not a nice guy. This is a horrible person. And yet, because he's able to give her that attention, she's kind of pulled into it. So pretty dark, pretty powerful stuff. There's a couple other great lines here too. Sorry, I'm kind of reading them off my phone here. And then I wondered how much anyone could know of the things they desire too much, these being the most frightening of all, and sometimes with good reason. That really struck me because I saw that, and there's several other passages like this, where the narrator is aware that she's seeking a desire to be fulfilled, that's a very dark desire, and that fulfilling it is not perhaps the right thing to do, that it's not going to end well, and yet she is unable to turn away from the opportunity to fulfill that desire. And here's one more. Like last night, what she finally asked of me was to leave. I felt stung by this, by her. Her being, there's another woman that she kind of falls in love with, and she's not comfortable falling in love, and it's not clear what's going on. And then again, it becomes apparent that there's some manipulation in that relationship. So I'll start again with that one. Like last night, what she finally asked of me was to leave. I felt stung by this, by her. I got up wanting to lash back, but swallowed it. And when I did, I found my throat already crowded with other things. I comforted myself with a plan of how to get back, not at her, but at myself. And I found that really interesting, that last bit, that not getting back at this other person, but getting back at herself. So there's kind of a moment, and there's several other passages like this too, where the narrator is aware that she's destroying herself, basically. And that's really, really, really sad. That here is a person basically self-harming through lifestyle choices, which could possibly be the worst kind of self-harm, because it's just kind of a slow motion self-destruction. And she's aware of it, and she's consciously making those choices, which is really disturbing and really, really just like really powerful. And I think that's what's really difficult and really shocking about the book. Not so much the graphic sex and the drug use and the violence, although those are shocking. But what's really shocking is that it raises the question of what does a person make of oneself when they know that they are being manipulated, that they are destroying themselves, and they just can't, just can't break out of it for some reason. It's really, really difficult, and I connected with it. I mean, I think we've all gone through some kind of, self-destructive phases before. I've certainly engaged in a lot of, very self-destructive behavior, and because of that, I felt like I could, on some level, I could connect. Obviously, I didn't go through things as extreme as what the narrator has gone through. But it's really powerful, and I think if you've known anyone who has gone through, like particularly through drug addiction or through very bad, repeatedly very bad relationships again and again and again, you might actually really get a lot out of this book. I know I got a lot out of it. So it raises the question of why read a difficult book, right? Shouldn't you be reading for pleasure? Shouldn't we be reading for fun? And it's a good question, and it's, and it could also raise a question of like, why should a book like this be written? Why should it be published? Why would you purposely read something that's difficult? Why wouldn't you just put it down and, go read something that's not so difficult? But I think it's important to read a book like this because to some extent, we all have a self-destructive, streak in us, even if it's just as a teenager, and I think increasingly too with the prevalence of hard drug use. I mean, compared to 20 or 30 years ago, hard drugs are just everywhere now. At least to me, it seems to be so much more prevalent. And along with that, there's all this sort of damage that goes with that. Drug addiction is more than just being addicted to getting high. There's a whole kind of lifestyle that goes with that. And I found that interesting in this book. I've read a lot of other books about or with characters that have addiction problems, and I felt like this was the first one that actually made the link between sex and drugs and overall pursuit of some kind of fulfillment through a very extreme pleasure that's derived from that. So I think that's really interesting. So I think it's important to read a book like that if you're ready for it. I mean, obviously it's not for everyone, but I think if you are, wondering what is it, what kind of person goes through that, or what goes through a person's mind with the pursuit of that, a book like this is important. A book like this is also important, obviously, too, because it gives a certain testament or it gives a voice to people, to a certain type of person, or to a group of people that just would not have that kind of voice, available to them. So it's not an easy question, why read difficult books, but I think difficult books are important and they do have their place. Obviously, the place is not the school library. Let's not get silly about it. But, we are, particularly in America, and this book is set in America. Heather Lewis was an American author. America is a destructive place. It's not, and it's a place that is not kind to people who can be manipulated. There's something in the fabric of American culture. We kind of see it with what's going on with the election now, but America is a place that's not kind to people like this, So I think, again, that aspect of it is important. And I think, difficult books just in general are important because, like I said, they give voice to people that we don't normally hear from, and that helps us build empathy. It helps us build sympathy. Not everyone is going to fully understand and connect with a character like this, but I think it's important to read something like this and to become aware of what people really go through, and help build empathy. And I think also too that, there's also issues of like what people go through. It doesn't always have to be such an extreme case, of a woman who's choosing to be a sex worker and who has problems with addiction. But there's also the larger problem of what do people go through to be noticed, and the difficulty that people have to present their true identity and their true self, and even just to discover their true identity and their true self. Some people, it's not so cut and dried. Life is not always so easy for everyone. And that makes this kind of book very, very, very important. So it's a complex reflection, and it's an honest reflection of, a part of our psyche that society generally wants to ignore and pretend doesn't exist, and pretend that it's just, very few extreme kinds of people. But I think it's important to understand that, at the right time in life, it can lead to, making the wrong decision at the wrong time is what I'm trying to say. It can really lead someone along a very painful, long path of destruction and demise. And I think a book like this is really eloquently portrays it, if not also at the same time very brutal. And I think that that's also very honest and realistic. Life is tough. Life is brutal. Life is not always great for a lot of people, and it's important that we read about that. So yeah, Heather Lewis, Notice, an extremely difficult book, but an extremely well-written book, and I think an even more important book. And I think a book like this needs a little more, maybe a little more attention from some of the right people. So there you go. Once again, my name is Carl. This has been Please Read Your Book, and I hope to see you again soon.